Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here with this week's episode of the Market Monday. So I'm going to switch things up for this Market Monday. We will get to Ultimate Masters. I know everyone is just itching for an update for Ultimate Masters, so we'll get to that in a second, and we'll also talk about Standard. But first of all, I just want to talk about the spoilers and how they might affect all of the formats surrounding them. So one of the first things that I always do when looking at cards that are spoiled is look for legendary creatures. There's always like one or two legendary creatures that spike up the prices of cards that go around them. We saw it with Hapatra, we saw it with Atali, Nahab, and even Nimizet had a little bit of effect on the market this time around. I think that the problem with Guilds of Ravnica was none of the commanders were too spicy. They were all just reprints of cards that already kind of existed in those slots, like Zoni and Nimizet were already archetypes before, so I don't think they led to a lot of people building those decks. But when you get like a card like Hapatra or Nahab that are more unique commanders, it tends to spike the price of cards that were bulk. For example, with Hapatra, all the -1 counters, and they have a bunch of cards that just did spread out a bunch of damage to opponents, spiked up in value. So, first of all, that's what we're going to be looking for. So far, I haven't really seen any legendary creatures that are too interesting, except for this Haunt of the Hightower. Again, this card, though, does feel very familiar to other cards that exist. I think that many of the ones that go like the discard routes, there's better ones that can hit discard, like Noth the Guilt Leaf, which has black and green in it. Also has a tribal elf theme to it. And we also have the mill strategies, plenty of Dimir mill cards from the past that I think do a better job. The Haunt of the Hightower, though, is interesting for Commander. I think a lot of people will want to build around this. It is the buy box promo. Flying lifelink whenever Hightower attacks if any player discards a card. Pretty lackluster in Commander, just one person discarding card, and whenever a card is put in opponent's graveyard from anywhere, put a +1 counter on Haunt of Hightower. So, where I like the Haunt of Hightower, if you're using it in like a Voltron-based Commander, look at the builds of like Skithrix. I don't know, not the builds at least with trying to pump up Skithrix, but at least the ones that protect the Haunt of the Hightower, try to give it haste, like the Lightning Greaves, and then can control the board really well. There are cards that can end up sweeping the board that can give a huge boost to the Haunt of the Hightower. Where I really like Haunt of the Hightower is in a mill type strategy. However, black, that gets a little bit rough with the usually mill cards are blue-black or black, but there should be some or blue, and there should be some cards like the I'm trying to think of the artifact whenever people untap a permanent. Then they have to mill the top card of their library. Cards like that I expect to be in a mono black list of the Haunt of the Hightower. And there are a bunch of artifacts that do mill. Those are the type of cards I'd look at. So maybe I'll look, as the days go by, we'll pick up the Haunt of the Hightower, build a commander deck around it, and try to predict exactly what type of cards will go in a deck like this. So there still is plenty of black cards that I'm sure that I'm just not thinking off the top of my head that do a lot of big mill type strategies. Dark Deal is one that comes in mind. The wheel type effects, those type of cards. So Memory Jar, I think, is very good with the Haunt of the Hightower, as again, whenever a card is put in an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, it gets +1 counter, and then it can Voltron down particular players. If you're not familiar with the term Voltron, that's what they give for the commanders that try to one-shot one opponent at a time. So think of like Skithrix, or I'm trying to think of the Naya commander that gets a bunch of auras. Those type of commanders. So those typically are pretty popular. It's better so far than I think Lavina. Lavina Azorius Renegade, I think, is going to have a ton of play, but that's going to be in Modern. I think Lavinia Azorius Renegade, which is a 2-mana for a 2/2, each opponent can't cast non-creature spells with converted mana cost greater than the number of lands that player controls, and whenever an opponent casts a spell with no mana was spent on it, then counter that spell. So the thing is, like, this does like scream a way to protect. Maybe we can get some sort of taxes-based strategy back in Legacy that can protect against Force of Will, and of course you can use your own Force of Wills. In Modern, there's not a ton of cards, save like Affinity, where the 0 mana cost actually comes into effect. However, the first portion of each opponent can't cast non-creature spells with converted mana cost. This is really going to be good, I think, for humans as a sideboard card against Tron. Now, Tron can be a bit of a headache for human stacks, and this is a very, very good slot. It's a human, so it's easy to cast, and it is going to shut down those. Typically, it's going to be able to stop like the Oblivion Stone before you're going to be swinging in for lethal with the humans. It's also going to stop Ugin and Karn, and I think for that reason, this card is going to be highly sought after for the humans list. So if you're looking to invest in a specific modern deck, I think the humans gets a lot more attractive with the reprinting of Noble Hierarch, and I think this should just flat out replace Gaddock Teeg in some of those lists, and we might actually see like a blue-white list that will run Tax's version of this particular card. Doesn't really work to flash it in if your opponent is already cast it on the stack. However, it does work flashing it in off of Aether Vial if your opponent is trying to cast a 0-cost spell. But again, that is more of a legacy thing, I would assume, than a modern thing. So this card, though, look at modern humans. Standard, it gets it's very awkward in standard. There are very few 0-cost spells in standard, and there are very few decks right now that are even ramping. So I don't think that Lavinia is going to work against those particular decks. It might work against March of Multitudes or other of those type of Convoke type cards, but I don't think that blue-white is really struggling from Selesnya, for example, or I don't think the Convoke cards are really what's getting your opponent advantage versus like Teferi's not worrying about any sort of the Boros Convoke cards either. So anyway, let's go on to some other spoilers. We have Mortify back in the list. This is a great addition to Standard. I think that it will give Orzhov some teeth because the Conclave Tribunals, some of those type of enchantments, especially Ixalan's Binding, I think that Mortify is perfect for Orzhov, and it's actually going to be pretty decent for the Esper list. Esper Control, I think, will want some amount of numbers of Mortify, just because if a Teferi ever does get Ixalan Binding, that's a great card to get you out of that sticky situation. And again, there are actually quite a few enchantments that this is relevant against. There's the Search for Azcanta, and there is a lot of speculation around Hodama's Climb. I don't think that Hodama's Climb is going to be a thing. We might see some more +1/+1 counters matters, but I just don't think that blue-green, even like what it has right now with Merfolk and what it has to offer, I think it's just lackluster to the other colors at the moment. And especially if Simic goes really hard on a +1/+1 counter theme, I highly doubt that it's going to be able to be competitive with the other aggressive decks. It's just like this awkward slot of try to go bigger over the top of the aggro decks, but fall to mid-range and definitely fall to control. But we'll have to wait and see. Of course, the rare that was spoiled just doesn't seem like it's very good. The Simic Ascendancy is 3 mana to put a +1 counter on a creature. That's pretty terrible when you think about it. And then when one or more +1 counters are put on a creature you control, put that many growth counters on a Simic Ascendancy. And begin to upkeep, if you have 20 or more growth counters, you win the game. So it's kind of a cheese alternate win condition of winning the game. So far, Loxodon, the Loxodon Smiter, is that what the card's called? No, Loxodon, whatever the Loxodon Convoke card is that puts +1 counters on creatures when they use it to cast its ability, seems like the best way to actually get the Simic Ascendancy. We might see a reprint of cards like Thrive or Hardened Scales or things like that spread out a bunch of counters. That's usually what Simic does. But again, if that's the strategy you're going, I think it's going to be very awkward. So I'm not really into Hinterland Harbor over the other dual lands at the moment, or the check lands at the moment. Like even now, the Dragonskull Summon is looking better and better as these cards are spoiled. So as you may know, those are the type of cards that I've been speccing all into for Standard. I've been ignoring everything and really going into the buddy lands or the check lands for the Orzhov, for the Rakdos, and I have been still going into the Simic and the the Glacial Fortress, the Azorius lands especially. So I think if you can still pick those up at pretty cheap, that is a smart idea. The other cards that have been spoiled is the Rix Mighty Reveler. I actually like this card a lot. I think that this might be able to push people into the of course, 3 colors is going to be very easy, but 2 color with Rakdos with aggro is going to be incredibly easy to mana fix. Going in Chain Whirler into Fire Whirler, for example, seems to be a pretty easy scenario to happen. But the Rix Mighty Reveler feels like a Bedlam Reveler, of course. It still has the Reveler name. And I think that all the modes are relevant to just a 2/2 to discard a card early on to fix is good. There are a lot of times with the mono red where you have those hands where you're flooded or you need to hit that third land for like the Chain Whirler. And I think the Rix Mighty Reveler fits this bill. And the Spectacle is actually really interesting with this because if you're out of cards, you're drawing 3 cards. And I think that it might push over like the Risk Factor type or Experiment Experimental Frenzy. Those are still extremely powerful cards, and you might be thinking, well, what world would that replace it? Well, in a world where you want to be very tempo with cards. Unfortunately, this card is a human shaman, which a lot of the red decks want to try to push towards more wizards so they can get Wizard's Lightning. However, again, this is a very powerful ability. I think people are going to underrate this, but once the spectacle comes into play by just saying it's a 2/2 for 4 mana where you draw 3 cards. That's very, very relevant in those burn-based strategies. The Rakdos Firewheeler I'm a little more impressed with, as this is the perfect curve topper. I think that this might be able to replace the Arclight, not the Arclight Phoenix, but the Rekindling Phoenix. Is that the card I'm thinking of, the 4/3 that recurs? As this is a 4/3 as well, and when it enters the battlefield, it does 2 damage to an opponent and up to 2 damage to a target creature or planeswalker. So it feels like another Chain Whirler type effect. You're killing a creature, you are doing damage to an opponent, and you're leaving back a 4/3 body. Now, it's not quite on par with Chain Whirler. In fact, Chain Whirler actually first strikes this down, but it's still a pretty powerful ability for the 4-drop slot that might be pushing people into Rakdos. And I actually think that the Planeswalker, the Pirate Planeswalker, can't think of names today, brain farts galore, but the 5 mana that gains control of a creature is pretty well positioned too in this particular meta, being able to take cards like Lyra, Dawnbringers, and then swing in for that particular turn. Or it just, makes the opponent discard a card, grinds it out, and can be a win condition by itself. So I think that Rakdos might have enough oomph just with what we've seen. And these two cards are definitely showing me that the Dragon Skull Summits are something that are looking better and better as spec targets. They seem to be the lowest one at the moment, and we've seen other cards that were extremely low. The Buddy lands, the check lands go up, double up, even slightly over double up for particular cards. Think of the Celestine one, for example. Light Up the Stage is another card that seems very interesting in that slot for the Experimental Frenzy and the Risk Factor. The Spectacle is just 1 mana, exile the top 2 cards of your library until end of turn. You may play those cards until your next turn. So it's just an easy draw 2 cards, basically, for 1 mana. Like, it's pretty bad, though, if you just have to pay the 3 mana. What I like about this is it says until the end of your next turn, so you can just Spectacle. Can you play these? No, you can't. So you may cast a spell for a Spectacle rather than paying its mana cost and put lost life this turn. I don't believe, since it's sorcerer speed, you can't use it in an instant. So you will be playing this on your turn post-combat after you've dealt with damage, and then it'll help you hit land drops. Remember, this is just 1 mana to basically have this draw 2 effect in mono red, because you're going to be able to hit those cards. It's also something that works very well with the Elemental, and another card I can't think of, the Steamkin. And as to, draw those additional cards, pump up the Steamkin, and then the Steam can be used for mana to, cast off even more of these if you have these exiled, or, even the next turn, be able to cast them. The Rafter Demon is pretty much filler, as it's just a 4/2 with Spectacle, and if it's Spectacle, each opponent discards a card. Pretty bad. This is just one of those filler cards for draft. The last is the Gate Colossus, which is still another casual card. I could see some decks trying to make this work. Cost 1 less for each gate you control. We actually have a ramp card that puts out 2 gates. So effectively, this can cost a lot less. Can't be blocked with creatures power 2 or less, but it still feels very, very weak. It does have some recursion to bring it back on the top of your library, but that's still not card advantage. That's still just putting up at your top of your library. So I think that's very casual. So all in all, we don't have really a ton of indicators of what we have going for us for the next set. Again, Mortify I think would be the best one spoiled right now, because it really gives teeth to Esper for going Esper over Jeskai, and it also, or even over Bant in that case for the Teferi decks. And I think this is still a deck that curves very well with those vampires and knights, as at least a sideboard slot. And again, it's just one of those reasons to be going into the Orzhov. So if we take a look at Standard right now, there is starting to see a little more movement in Standard. We saw basically a full decline of the format when Ultimate Masters came down, and now we're seeing some of the more heavier played cards, even like Steel Leaf Champions, start to go back up. Uncommons out of Guild Ravnica was very, very surprising that uncommons still hold value, because I think that this set would be open more than it actually has. But according to just my numbers, just comparison price, it looks like Dominaria still remains the king of the most recent set that has been opened into oblivion. And you can kind of check the mythic prices versus the mythic prices of Dominaria. We still have a $53 Teferi. Teferi is still one of those cards that people are just holding on to because of the modern playability. I personally think that's a bad idea. I think $53 is just insane for a mythic in today's day and age. But we saw Chandra at this same point in time see a ton of play in Modern. Remember, Chandra did. So did the other one out of Shadows of Innistrad, the Nahiri, and it still began to decline about this time period right before we get ready for the inevitable rotation of Standard. Usually, I mean, I know that Standard just rotated, but you seem to be like late winter and early spring tends to be the time when all Standard cards that are rotating start to go down, as vendors are trying to free up as many as possible, and that's usually when they hit their highs, is when the second set of the new rotation hits. Then the cards start to go down in value. Remember that decks also get the least customizable because their card pool is the biggest. Well, not the biggest, but I mean, you have the most of the card pool, then you're going to get a core set, you're going to get another set as well. But I mean, comparatively, it's pretty big right now, and the cards that are printed are less effective than like the first and the second set in a Standard season. So anyway, we have Teferi, though, still going up in value. Again, this is just people thinking that this is going to be an expensive card in the long term. The big thing, though, that was still very, very real is this spread. You see a huge spread between market price and between TCG mid, and a lot of times you even see a spread between market price and TCG low. So yeah, it seems like this one isn't too bad for Teferi, so it does seem like Teferi is trending back up. I think it really is in anticipation of Esper and Jeskai really being king after this rotation when they get perfect mana. Even Jeskai gets better mana, but Esper really, really gets better mana. And I do play an Esper control list, and the games that I do lose is because of bad mana. It's when the Settle the Wreckage can't hit on the perfect time, or the sweepers can't hit at the perfect time. Teferi, same thing. Or you have these awkward hands like you need double white into double black. That's going to all be solved with the Shocklands coming out in this particular set. All right, so the other thing, of course, that you want to talk about is Ultimate Masters. Everyone keeps talking about the Great Recovery. However, let me pull up the spreadsheet that I updated. I did update it yesterday, so I haven't updated it today, but it didn't seem like there's much movement in the market today. But it's like I keep hearing all this recovery for Ultimate Masters. Yes, it has gone up since its low, which was something that was expected. I thought that it would continue to go down, but you got to keep in mind that the bottom of where Ultimate Masters end up being was lower than even I anticipated. It's rebounded to about right where I thought it was going to be, and others thought it was going to be. And I still think that there is going to be another wave. I think the Wizards would be too stupid to pass up just the ability to suck out even more money out of people because it's a hot seller. Like, hot sellers don't come every day and age. They did terrible on Ixalan. They did terrible on Rivals of Ixalan. The Battle Bond restock ended up like probably not where they wanted to be. It's going to take forever to strip the supply of where Battle Bond. They restocked the Battle Bond thinking it'd be like unstable and people just buy it right back up. And however, there's just tons of Battle Bond product out there. And even Guilds of Ravnica seems to be a good selling set, but seems to be slowed way down. So I think that they're going to continue to have their strong profits. I think that they're going to push for another Ultimate Masters. Probably not as big as the first wave, but I think they're going to also keep the Walmart stocked. I've heard like people say that Walmart's only get one little case of that. Oh, bull. I'm sure as soon as those get sold, they refill them. That is a big operation that happens. But let's go ahead and pull this up. Let me find the spreadsheet, and we can kind of look at where it's at with the TCG low, or the low prices that we have going on right now. So again, we have about a 211, 241 with no topper. We have the box toppers really around the $60 average for the box toppers. That's one thing that I have noticed this week, is we have had a lot of price recoveries, especially in these high-end mythics. However, we also have had a slight decrease in the topper value, and that seems to be the trend. We've also had a lot of uncommons go from the point of actually holding value of but around that 50 cents, where I've taken them completely off the list because they are considered at this point not having value. in the overall value of a set. Same thing could be said. We're still having a lot of these $1 cards. Some of them did recover, like Pattern of Rebirth and Visions of Beyond. However, I think those will go right back down. Had some big recoveries even in cards like Daybreak, Coronet, doubling back up. But the name of the game, the big news was it was mainly in these slots, these bigger high-end mythics and high-end rares. It wasn't really across the board for all of Ultimate Masters, and this is really what was hurting the price of Ultimate Masters. Is when the set was spoiled with about a box value of like $400-$500. It was because these cards like Lenalandra Archmage was something like $20-$25. Flagstone of Care was a $30 card, and all of these held a huge amount of equity for the set EV, and these have really crashed, and I still think that they're going to continue to go that route. If we check back over at Ultimate Masters, you see we have this basically this almost everything up, but again, it's not that crazy, and I think that again we're going to see a flat line out. There needs to be something that happens in Modern to really push for people. I still think that the mass buying spree that happened for the Liliana's, Karns, Caverns, Snapcasters, all those type of cards were people that were just fear of missing out. Their fear of missing that bottom, and everyone bought in, and it caused its own little domino effect of prices going back up. Even places like Channel Fireball and Card Kingdom were very worried about this set, and they were competing with the low prices, and it looks like they were even bought out. But it seems to be their stock is starting to recover as well, and we might see prices really start to dip down. My prediction is Ravnica Allegiance will breathe new life in Standard, and we're going to see Modern as a whole continue to trend down. As I said before in other videos, the Ultimate Masters was after Modern had already been very stagnant in price and was already trending down from about M19 forward. So keep that in mind with Ravnica Allegiance. If it does end up having like a very robust Standard, I'm thinking that people are going to gravitate away from Modern once again and into Standard, and that's when we're really going to start to see the prices going to where they should be with these Ultimate Masters, and especially if that's coupled with the fact that there is a restocking of Ultimate Masters. I still think, like, according to these are my distributor's words, not my word, they haven't seen a Master set yet that hasn't had a restock. So even Modern Masters, original Modern Masters had a slight restock. Modern Masters 2 had a massive restock. Modern Masters 3 had its first initial massive stock and then did have a restock. And it actually, people forget that Modern Masters also flatlined out pretty well for a good 4, 5, 6 months. And still, in my opinion, Modern Masters, the third one, has the most amount of cards that have the best longevity of being able to accrue value over time. The fetch lands are by far the most popular cards in all of Modern and I would even say in all of Magic. And this particular set, even though it had a lot of old school bombs, does not have fetch lands. And I think the Modern Masters 3, for that reason, was able to be opened at a very high rate and to have a lot of prices that then came down but have leveled off, and were going up until, of course, the Ultimate Masters was reprinted. So I don't know. I'm still in the camp that I think there will be another restock. How big it is, we don't know. I don't know if it's another reprinting. Again, at this point, I think that it would be kind of crazy for Wizards not to reprint them, as we've seen everything in the past indicates that they have reprinted very successful things, with the one exception that I can think of, which was Commander 2017. For whatever reason, they did not do another restocking of it, and that was one that just went crazy due to the demand outstretching the supply very quickly. And those prices, like, would we have the Atraxes and the Breas go up to like $100 a piece, and everyone thought for sure there would be a restocking. Now, the same thing happened the next year with the next Commander set, and they did restock it. Like, prices initially were sold out for a lot of Commander decks. They restocked it, and then we had those prices really crash down and stay stagnant until about the next Commander. And we even saw that this Commander set got a restock even though there wasn't the demand there. So I'm in the camp that Ultimate Masters gets restocked. I'm thinking that this will finally be the one that pushes it over the edge. People can't just continue to make insane record profits on boxes. A box that has been able to basically hold its EV even more is unheard of since the original Modern Masters. And those were a different day and age where Wizard wasn't so gung-ho with their being able to print stock over and over to meet demand. In today's Standard day and age, they continue to print. and that's why we continue to see very, very low prices. Constant Tarkir, if you go over and look at like Constant Tarkir, even Theros, those sets have still not recovered years and years and years later, and that's what's kind of going to make these master sets in the future very, very hard to reprint, as there aren't many cards from the Theros forward that actually even hold enough value to even consider being put in these sets. We have some exceptions, like some poorly sold sets like Eldritch Moon and Shadows of Innistrad, but other than that, the vast majority of sets just do not hold any cards of any value. So anyway, we'll keep a very, very tight look on the Standard. I think that that's going to be the interesting things. If I were to give any sort of picks in Standard, I would definitely start looking at the Buddy lands. I still think that they are, or the Czech lands, they're still pretty undervalued comparatively to their counterparts. We have like Clifftop Retreat still going up at $5. This was a card that before was all the way down to $2. And if we look at the Hinterland Harbor, for example, it's started to go up, but you got to think that that's where that card's going to level off as well. It's around the $5 to $6. So there's still some nice little money to be made here with the Hinterland Harbor. That's actually my least favorite one out of all of them. I still like the ones out of Ixalan slightly better. I know they've been printed a lot, but like the Dragon Skull Summit, you can find older versions of these cards, and the Glacial Fortress, I think, have a lot of room to go up, especially since those Teferi decks are going to be using the Glacial Fortresses in the months to come, as well as any other pairings that end up using the white-blue pairing. And, of course, my favorite one is the Orzhov one. That's the one that I think has the best chance of going up. It's also a Dominaria and an original Innistrad were the only printings for it. I think that one it might have been in a Commander set as well, or another supplemental product if I remember correctly. Let's take a look at it. Why can't I think of the name here? We have the, not the Woodland Cemetery. Let's find the Isolated Chapel. That's what it's called. So Isolated Chapel, yeah, around the $4 mark. I think that this one is going to go the best up. I also think that Abzan gets a lot better. Like, it might push those Explorer decks to want to go into Abzan for a little more flexibility of cards that are contained in it. And typically Orzhov has those mid-range type cards. We had like the Bloodseeker Vizkopa last time around. I think that some of these Abzan lists are really wanting a card like that. Maybe instead of the Doom Whisperer slot or the Carnage Tyrant slot. I know Tyrant's really good right now for beating through control, but it might not be if they can get like another evasive type creature or durable type creature in Orzhov. It could push them over, like a Siege Reno type card, for example. And that's typically Orzhov does bring that to the table. So anyway, this was printed in yes, it was also in the Modern Event deck, but prices are starting to creep up in all of those, the Modern Event deck, the Innistrad, and the original Dominaria. So not a lot of news for Market Monday. Just thought I'd push out a video. We'll be looking at these spoilers as time goes on and see what decks they kind of flirt with. And if there is like a legendary creature that does just really strike that it's going to be the popular one, we'll definitely look at the cards that are surrounding it. Right now, I might build a Honda the Hightower deck. There's a lot of mill cards in black that I think makes this viable. Whether or not that's going to be the route that people go, people might just go discard. You can look at Noth the Gilt Leaf, or I'm sure there's plenty of Rakdos, or I'm thinking, yeah, there's a Rakdos discard commander for sure. Why can't I think of it at the moment? But Noth's a good one to kind of look at the cards that go in that, and when opponents discard cards, that puts a +1 counter on it, and this card gets huge. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. This has been Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder with the Market Monday. Thanks for watching.